Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, hope you're having an amazing day. Boy oh boy, I've been looking forward to covering this one, because Tim Sweeney, who is of course the CEO over at Epic Games, the creators of Unreal Engine 5, is saying that the problems that we are experiencing in performance and hitching and frame time spikes and that stuff with Unreal Engine 5, that isn't a UE5 problem. Nope. Instead, it is a problem that should be addressed by games developers because of their workflow and lack of optimization experience. So, shove under the bus is the best way of describing this. Now, it's hard to deny that UE5 has had a lot of problems, or at the very least games which are using Unreal Engine 5 have had a lot of problems. With that said, I do think that Unreal Engine has also been a very beneficial thing for the games industry, and I might get some groans in the comments for that, but I do think that being able to empower developers to create games, especially if you're not as experienced, I think we've had some wonderful indie titles, whether they're 2D pixel art or whatever, I do think that that's really cool. However, there does indeed seem to be this history of games that just don't seem to perform as well as they should, regardless of the hardware. And the feature set for Unreal Engine 5, when we were first learning about it, obviously we were learning about Lumen and Nanite and all of this other stuff. And, just for example, with Nanite, it obviously is this virtualized geometry thing, and it sounds really cool. Like, you can kind of not have to worry about creating all of these different objects with all these different lots. In fact, basically the game engine just kind of does it all itself. And naturally, we've discussed this many times over on the channel. I don't want to just eat up tons of video time explaining what Lumen and Nanite are. But there have been many titles over the past several months alone that have just not performed well. And I think for many, what we've seen with Metal Gear Solid Delta, or Metal Gear Solid 3 Remake, whatever you want to call it, is a great example of this. And you can definitely say, well, maybe the teams does need to do a little bit more optimization, but this is kind of getting a bit ridiculous. But let's get into the quote first, and then we'll start to drill down more into this. So, Tim Sweeney says, and I quote, by the way, this is courtesy of Clawsome Gamer, which is a brilliant name. This is a translation of an original Korean source because he was at, that is Tim, at an Unreal Fest keynote in South Korea. The main cause is out-of-order development, he says. Many studios build for top-tier hardware first and leave optimization and low-spec testing for the end. Ideally, optimization should begin early, before the full content build-out. We're doing two things: strengthening engine support with automated optimization across devices, and expanding developer education so optimize early becomes standard practice. Also, our engineers can step in. Games complexity is much higher than 10 years ago, so it's hard to solve purely at the engine level. Game makers and game teams need to collaborate. I'm also bringing Fortnite optimization learnings to Unreal Engine, so titles run better on low-spec PCs. Okay. I'm going to put just a little pin on that before I go any further, and I'm going to show you guys an article from Digital Foundry. This is just over a year ago now, so I believe the current version of UE is a UE 5.6 in public. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe that that's the current public version. This is UE 5.4. Since then, there have been some improvements. However, Fortnite, this is on a Ryzen 7 7800X 3D and an RTX 4090. And this is being tested at 1080p. So basically speaking, 1080p on an RTX 4090. A 4090 is about the second most powerful GPU on the planet, and the game does not lock all of the time to 60 FPS. Essentially, you're still going to get hitches and other problems. And this is not something that seems to have been resolved, even with the latest Unreal Engine versions, from what I'm reading anyway. Lots of folks in the comments made a thread about this on X or Twitter, whatever you want to say, and lots of folks were still saying that they're experiencing tons of problems with Unreal Engine, with Fortnite on their system. And furthermore, another issue with all of this is that I could almost accept this if PC gamers, just for example, were the ones that were dealing with this, and it was like, well, the game recommends at a minimum, let's just hypothetically say, an RTX 3070 for 1440p. you're running an RTX 4070 at 1440p and you're just cranking the settings to max, yeah, it's acceptable that you get a few frame rate dips here or there, but it's not like that. Like, people are experiencing these problems on the highest specification rigs that you can possibly get. And I'm sorry, but there is just this point of like, look, if I'm experiencing shader stutter, if I'm experiencing this problem or that problem or inconsistent performance at, you know, a system that basically is about the most powerful system you can build, whether that's a 9800 X3D or a 9950 X3D, or, you know, it's got like a 5080 or a 5090 in it, or like a 280, an Intel 285K or something like that. There is just something wrong. Now, it's not to say that all games with UE5 have problems. I recently played RoboCop Rogue City, and I can't remember what the DLC is called, like Back in Action or something like that. I can't remember. But it played pretty well. However, one consistent thing I've noticed with many of the Unreal Engine games that do seem to perform pretty decently is that they are fairly linear. Hellblade is a great example. The game looks beautiful, whether it's on the Xbox Series consoles or the PC or the PS5. It looks beautiful. Like, there's just, you can't say the game doesn't look great. I mean, personally, it's not my game. It's just not. Like, I love the atmosphere of it, but I just don't like the gameplay. I know other people absolutely adore the game, and that's great. I'm happy for you, because I really wanted to enjoy it. But you know what? The game looks beautiful, and it plays pretty well. And in my testing on the PC anyway, and a little bit on the Xbox, I couldn't really notice any major problems. And that seems to be pretty consistent. And again, that seems to be because the game is basically fairly linear. You don't have these massive open world environments where you can go from one thing to another thing. And further to this, other games that we're seeing that do fairly well, there seems to be like, the reality is that the teams can do a lot of optimization, a lot of coding. Now, do I think it is somewhat a developer problem? I'm going to take my glasses off because I don't need them anymore. Yeah, probably. I think that this is like a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. However, there is that thing of, like, the commonality does seem to be Unreal Engine. And I do understand that games development has become way more complicated. But at the same time, it's like all of these features are being thrown in. Just here's my thing. Like, let's throw the PCs out of the window for a second to talk about. Let's talk about the PlayStation 5. Forget the Pro, just the base model PlayStation 5, and we'll also ignore the Xbox just for a second as well. So let's just talk about the PS5 Pro. PS5 base model. Okay. Now, I've heard from developers, and they'll say, well, you know what, these machines, you know, to use all of their features and stuff like that, it's really heavy on the PS5 and all of this stuff, and I 100% agree, you know, but that's fine. And upscaling for Unreal Engine is pretty impressive. Obviously, on the PS5 Pro, you've also got PSSR, but it's not like when the PlayStation 6 gets released, or the next generation of Xbox, or what have you. We're not going to get additional features which are just as heavy. And so we're getting to this really weird point in graphics, and I've spoken about this before, and I'm very curious to hear what you guys think as well, where, yeah, okay, Batman Arkham Knight is a great example. I don't know exactly how old it is, but it's around, what, 10-ish years old? Someone correct me in the comments. And to me, it still looks absolutely gorgeous because of the art direction. It just bloody looks gorgeous. It's that simple. I've been playing Gears, what is it called? Gears Reloaded, Gears of War Reloaded, and I've played it pretty briefly on the PC because I've played it so many times on the Xbox and the PC. And I believe that that's using a branch of UE3, and obviously I've done some modifications to the code and blah, 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 and, you know, it looks pretty good. This is not a performance analysis. I've only gotten to the very beginning. Basically, once you kind of, like, find Marcus at the beginning, you kind of do, like, you know, the initial several firefights. But at 4K with DLSS at quality, I believe, everything set to max. This is the this is the Game Pass version on PC on an RTX 3080 on a 10900K, so that's like my kind of mid-range system. I was getting like 80, 90, 100 frames a second depending. That's an average. That's not like the mins or maxes or anything like that. And again, I wasn't like doing a major benchmarking, it was just me running around. The point is that the game still looked absolutely beautiful. And I do think that ray tracing and path tracing, and in a game like Cyberpunk, is really impressive. However, I look at a title such as Borderlands 4, and I'm sorry, I'm going to pick on Borderlands 4 again. It's not that it looks ugly, right? It's not hideous, but at the same time, it does not look like Cyberpunk 2077, like Phantom Liberty, when you've got all the ray tracing, all the path tracing and everything like set to max, or Alan Wake even. Like, if I see a game like Alan Wake and I, turn on the path tracing and stuff, I can't whine. It's like, yo, dude, you don't have to turn on, like, path tracing. You don't have to make it so every single bloody light in the scene is going to reflect on every single sodding can, and also the very strands of Alan Wake's hair is also going to project light, and also aliens are going to come down. It's like, it just, like, you kind of understand, well, you're cranking things up so bloody high, of course you're going to need like a spaceship to be able to run it. That makes sense. But when I see a game like Borderlands 4, it just pisses in my Cheerios, because there have been early performance, numbers and stuff, and it's like, if the thing is not running consistently on an RTX 5080 and the game looks like that, it just really rubs me the wrong way. And I really want to know in the comments below what you think about this. Because I would agree that the thing is with Unreal Engine, right, is that it is something for everyone. So we as gamers, we see like, oh, well, it's great for, well, game development. But it's also being used, of course, for like the FX industry and all. It's just used for so much stuff. And I do wonder just how much of this is just the fact that the engine is being used for so much stuff. But that's not to say that I totally disagree with Tim. I also would agree that games developers, at the end of the day, it's somewhat your responsibility to A, pick a game engine that's going to serve the game well, and B, it's also your responsibility to be like, well, maybe we noticed that the game just runs like absolute dog shit. Maybe we should kind of try to fix that at least to a degree, or up the minimum required specifications. And again, it isn't like Unreal Engine 5 has a monopoly on just being an absolute shit show. Like, Sony, on some of their PC ports have been absolutely brilliant. Returnal, for example. Absolutely amazing. God of War, Ragnarok, you can play that thing at like hundreds of frames a second with 4K on a high-end graphics card. You don't need any DLSS or multi-frame generation. It is also beautiful looking. Like God of War Ragnarok was absolutely beautiful, and there are many other titles that you can also choose from Sony's library. Ratchet and Clank, for example. With that said, there are also titles such as Spider-Man 2 that launched on PC and they just weren't up to snuff. It's that simple. Last of Us shader stuff, oh my god. Like, it was easy as bad as some of the shader stuff that we've seen on Unreal Engine. And I also think that, yeah, you can somewhat mitigate this stuff on PC because you can, of course, enable stuff like DLSS and obviously multi-frame generation, and you can simply just overpower the damn problems. Like, there's the old meme of like, well, it runs fine for me, and the person that's complaining is, just about beating the, the recommended specifications, and the person saying, yeah, it's fine for me, is running like a, like a Threadripper processor and like 259s an SLI. Well, okay, that's slight exaggeration because you can't SLI really anymore, which makes me sad, Panda, but still. So I'm very curious to hear what you guys think about this. Do you think it is the fault of game developers? Do you think it's a little bit of both? I do think also that development timelines are now becoming a lot tighter, and it's going to be very interesting. I'm very much hoping that this is a problem that starts to resolve itself. Microsoft, of course, recently said that they're going to work on pre-compiled shaders which can be downloaded. Ultimately, If I were Nvidia, I mean, you could also say the same thing for AMD, but if I was Nvidia, like, I can't even imagine how frustrating it is to be dealing with this crap, because, you know, you're trying to push like a, you know, your 5090 or what have you, or God knows, a 6090. Like, it just, you know, you're just looking at the minimum frame rate times because of bloody shader stutter or what have you is just creeping up. So, I don't know. I'll be very curious to see what happens. As for the consoles, you've also got the fixed hardware specifications, so while I do understand that ultimately speaking visuals do help sell a game, I'm sorry, but if you're cranking the visuals so high that the game is just not able to hit a consistent frame rate, and more to the point, like you start, it goes even at such low frames, or like you keep bumping up against like the VRR minimum, it just oh, I don't know. Like, gaming is so cooked at this point. Let me know what your thoughts and opinions of this one is, guys. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.